Hello everyone, and welcome to the Birdwatchers Guide to Insects. In this series, I will be showing you how to identify insects just like a scientist. Now, insects have been made to seem a lot more complicated than they really are. And I am here to show you that you know more than you think you do. And that being a birdwatcher and understanding birds has given you a set of tools that you need to understand insects as well. To start with, we are going to have to take a look at one of my favorite parts of biology, taxonomy. Now, taxonomy is kind of like the family tree of life in a way, and going down each rung groups things in smaller and smaller groups until you get down to an individual species. Let's take a look at that. The first thing to learning taxonomy is understanding a couple names of some of those groups. The first one that we're going to look at is class, then we're going to look at order, family, and then genus, species. I put those two together because normally when you identify something you get both. Genus is a larger grouping, and then species is obviously more of an individual. So for class, something that you all might be familiar with is aves. Aves are our birds. Other familiar classes are going to be insects and amphibians and all those sorts of groupings like that, right? Mammals. Things that a lot of these things are fairly straightforward. It's just that it's given a fancy title, right? So orders are going to be something like game birds, waterfowl, raptors, songbirds, larger groups like that, I'm sure many of you could come up with other ones of these that are larger groups of birds that have smaller groups within them, and that's what order is. Families would include more specific groupings of things, like how you would organize something on a bird list, or maybe if you like to organize your photos of birds this way, you're going to have things like crows and jays together, hawks and eagles, and then falcons separate, geese, ducks, and swans, turkey and partridge are together, and quail and bobwhite are together, little more specific groupings like that make sense when you think about it. So now let's apply this. This is obviously not animals here, but we're just going to look at some shapes and symbols here, and we're going to understand how groupings could be made. Obviously, it's not as simple as this when it comes to animals, but for our purpose, sure, it can be. There's no reason why it can't be. We're not looking at genetics of things out in the field. It would be very impressive if you could see that closely, but I doubt it. So we're just going to look at some characteristics of things, and that's how we'll group them, right? So for these objects here, right, we're going to say this class is characterized by something being a shape or something being a symbol. So let's group those. We've got our shapes grouped together and our symbols grouped together. So let's take a look at just one class, right? Because that's what we're doing with birds and insects. So next we're going to have an order. This order is characterized by sharp edges. Okay, so let's organize that, right? We know that our square has some sharp edges, our triangle does, rectangle does, and the star's got some sharp edges there too, right? So that's our order and the characteristic that describes it. Next, we're going to have a family. And this family is characterized by having 4 sides. Okay, so that narrows it down even more to just our square and our rectangle. Once we have it down to that, we can have it be genus and species, right? And so these are just kind of silly, it's just a little demonstration on how this sort of thing works, but it shows you that that's really how simple it is. you characterize things based on appearance a lot of the times, but it's not always appearance, right? Like bats and birds are not related at all, right? Just because something looks somewhat similar doesn't mean that it's in the same group, but there are very, very, very often a characteristic or a set of characteristics that differentiate things. And knowing what those are lets you know what family, order, class, genus sometimes that this species that you're looking at is in. Now that you sort of understand taxonomy from a scientific standpoint, let me show you that you already know this. You've already used taxonomy in your daily life, bird watching. You might be thinking that I'm crazy and that you definitely don't know this and you've never used this before, but let's just go over a little scenario in our heads, right? Let's say you're looking out your window and you see this silhouette of something that you think, well, that's not a raptor, that's not a duck, that's not, so it's got to be some kind of a songbird, right? And you get a little bit closer and you're thinking, well, first of all, you knew that it was a bird when you saw it. And you get a little bit closer and you realize there's an American robin, right? It's a very common thrush that we have in pretty much everywhere in America, right? That right there, if that whole scenario just made sense to you, then you just use taxonomy to identify a species, right? You looked at something, you understood that it was a bird, so you knew what class it was in. You knew that it was a songbird. It wasn't a hawk. It definitely wasn't a duck. It wasn't a goose. It was some sort of songbird. It's pretty small, so you kind of assumed that. And then you knew that it was a robin, which gives you genus and species right there. And you understood that it was a thrush, so you know what family it was in as well. So there you go. You have class, order, family, genus, species that you just used by looking out the window. So now that we've gone over birds, let's take a look at insects. They're organized very much the same way, right? With birds, their class was Aves. With insects, their class is Insecta, which is a very easy name to remember, right? For aves, their characteristics are feathers and a toothless beak. For insects, the characteristics are a few of them. There's 5. There is compound eyes, antenna, 3 body segments, 6 legs, and an exoskeleton made out of chitin. Now, you might be thinking that you already know what an insect is when you see one, but it's good practice to take a look at these characteristics and use them to identify things rather than using our guts. So let's do it, right? Here we go. Let's take a look at a common insect, the monarch butterfly. Let's say one of your friends said that they don't think that that's an insect, and we're going to go prove them wrong. All right, here's our monarch. You saw it flying over onto this flower, and now you want to know whether it's an insect or not, right? So the first thing that we're going to look at is body segments, whether they have all 3, the head, thorax, and abdomen that all insects share. So we're looking and we see a head and a thorax, but it's kind of hard to see where that abdomen is underneath those wings. So maybe you follow it and it flies to another area and it starts to curl this thing underneath this leaf. So let's look again. We've got a head. We still can see that thorax in the middle. And now we have an abdomen curling around, very visible for us to see. So that's great. And now it flies away and goes to another spot. And this gives us the perfect opportunity to look at compound eyes and antenna. And now we get to the 6 legs portion here. Well, monarchs are kind of tricky when it comes to this, right? If you look at it, it only looks like it has 2 legs on each side, but let's do a count anyways just to see, right? So we see 1 there and 1 there, right? There is actually 6 legs because they are an insect, right? They have to. They have a pair of very reduced legs in the front, and you can see that it's pretty much the same color as the other legs, so it makes it a little bit easier to see in this picture, but more often than not, you won't even know that this is here. So that goes to show you that sometimes things can be very tricky to see on these insects, but they do all have them. So 6 legs are a yes. And the chitin exoskeleton is also yes. Really, this is here mainly to differentiate insects from things that are goopy or not as structurally sound as insects are, right? Insects are very rigid and hard, so yes on that. This is not a worm-looking thing. And before we move on to your portion of it, right, we're going to have you do some as well. We're going to look at compound versus simple eyes, just so you know the difference, so you know what we're looking for. Compound eyes are over here on the left. You can see those big eyes that sometimes they have a pattern on them, sometimes they'll have a little dot on them, but it's a solid eye that contains many little, I guess you could say it's an eye that has little eyes inside of it, right? It's not simple eyes, right, which are over here on the right. So those are just little dots that don't even really see vision. They just have, it's kind of like a light and dark sensor, right? They can only see changes in light. So that's the big difference between compound and simple eyes is, simple eyes are usually smaller and they're just little dots, right? And compound eyes have many little eyes that make up a big eye. So here's one that you can do on your own if you would like. Um, I will go over it in just a second here. You can pause the video and look at it. Okay, I will assume that you just looked at it or you want to do one more with me. Either way is fine. So this is a pretty similar one to our monarch, right? We can see a head, we can see a thorax and an abdomen. Very good. We can see compound eyes and antenna. And then there are 6 legs that are visible on this, right? We have 1, 2, 3 on each side. So 6 legs is a yes. And does it look very goopy or squishy? No, not really. Probably if you touched it, it would stay in one shape, right? So we'll go with yes. All right, here's another one. Now let's go over it together. We've got head, thorax, and abdomen. Yep. We have compound eyes and antenna. And then we have 1, 2, 3 legs on each side, totaling 6. Very good. And this guy very much looks like a sturdy fellow, right? So I would say definitely a chitinous exoskeleton on this one. All right, this one might be a little bit tricky. All right, let's see. Let's go over it together now. So we've got difficult to tell apart body segments here, don't we? But you can see the head in the front. You can see a thorax kind of hanging out there in the middle, and you can see an abdomen on the end. It's behind the wings, but you can assume there's something that the wings are covering, right? Now let's look at the compound eyes, which are very visible on this, but something that is not very visible on this is the antenna, which are located right there. It looks almost like he has a little mustache in the front. It's very, very, very small and hard to see. And if you can't see it, that might be why you thought this wasn't an insect. Now we'll look at 6 legs. We've got 1, 2, and 3. Yep, 3 on each side is 6. And this guy also looks very sturdy, so we'll go with yes on the exoskeleton. All right, now we've got another tricky one. These are very small. Okay, we've got our body segments to look at first. We've got a head, thorax, and abdomen. Compound eyes are, well, they're hard to tell, so let's skip them for now. And antenna, most certainly. 6 legs. Let's see. We've got 1, 2, 3. Yep, on each side. Good. That's 6. Chitinous exoskeleton. Yeah, they look very sturdy. They're not squishy or anything. So yes on that. So let's go back to compound eyes and look at this little drawing that I've made here, which is glorious. Um, Looking at those eyes, you can see something unusual about them, right? They don't look like one solid eye. It's more of multiple simple eyes next to each other, and that's because that's what they are, right? These are not compound eyes. These are simple eyes that are clustered. So they're not considered true compound eyes, which makes them not insects. So that's going to be the rundown of a few insects and one not insect to give you a little bit of practice telling what insects are and using these characteristics in real world situations, right? Now that you are all experts in identifying insects to class, the next rung down is order. Now there are about 23 some odd orders that we can get in New York State, and I'm not sure about the rest of the country because that's not where I'm located. But I can say with a lot of certainty that there are about 7 of them that you need to know that are the basic ones. And that's what we will be going over in the next video. Thank you for watching this one, and I look forward to seeing you there.